Thank you. It is a great and undeserved honor to be here in the footsteps of such distinguished predecessors. I am very grateful to Professor Leftow for inviting me as one of his last official acts here at Oriel. I am very grateful to Oriel College and especially to Dr. Wood for the warm hospitality that I have received. I will be giving 5 lectures, and they will be presented as sort of arguments for the existence of God. I say sort of because they're not going to be deductive arguments or even highly formalized Bayesian arguments of the sort that Professor Swinburne is known for. They will be stories on which various problems, some of which are well known and others of which are known maybe only to a few specialists or perhaps even unknown, can receive a solution based on a theistic theory. I take it that when a wide variety of problems receives a solution on the basis of a particular theory, that provides evidence for the theory to the extent that there aren't better competing solutions, and it is stronger evidence the more varied the data that is explained is. So this is kind of an excuse for a certain lack of unity in the data that will be presented. So that's sort of one side, is you can see it as a move from below to above, finding evidence for God. And it's, again, the evidence is something here in a lot of this, like what my colleague Steve Evans at Baylor calls signs. It's signs that point towards God, I think, more than something like Aquinas' 5 ways, which I think are a marvelous piece of work. But there's also another way to look at this. And this is, these are lectures in natural theology. Natural theology is an attempt to see what can be said about God by natural reason. One of the things that I think people, all the religions, well, all the monotheistic religions think is that God is deeply involved in everything. God is something like the ground of reality, the ground of being. He's behind everything. So it's also an attempt to see the ways in which God is manifested, involved, whether voluntarily or just by his very nature, in a variety of phenomena in the world, that he's not just a first cause that is then of no further use, but to fill in an explanatory gap at the beginning. So in the first lecture, I will talk about the argument from beauty. In the second, I will do something that has received some attention in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, which is an epistemological argument. It's going to be an argument that the theism provides the best explanation of why skepticism is false. The third and fourth are going to get referred to a number of times in the first and second, sort of, so it's always useful to put off difficulties for a later lecture, especially a later lecture that isn't yet written, but exists only in my head, and hence I can change it as needed. And there I will be interested in the way that an Aristotelian picture of human beings as having a nature that is a genuine metaphysical component of our being can help resolve a number of difficulties. Some of them in ethics that have not been much addressed, some in epistemology that have been widely discussed, some in semantics that have been widely discussed. The idea is going to be that in a number of cases, a kind of middle ground between relativism and objectivism is appropriate, namely the relativization of norms to human beings rather than to individuals, namely to the human species. And this kind of relativization of norms to the human species is a very powerful tool, I think, and resolves a number of puzzles. At the same time, the resolution of these puzzles is not all that satisfactory unless there's something like theism in the background explaining why we have the particular nature we do. So in the third lecture, I will mostly be sketching the ways human nature is helpful to the solution. Human nature is a serious metaphysical component in human beings, as in Aristotle's view, is important for the solution of various problems. And in the fourth lecture, how these solutions are only fully satisfactory if this human nature is something that reflects God and is chosen by God for instantiation. And then in the final lecture, I will take up a topic that has not been thought of much outside of philosophy of mathematics, and even in the philosophy of mathematics, perhaps not as much as it deserves. And it's a puzzle, it's a problem that Descartes used as the basis of one of his arguments for the existence of God, which is where we get the concept of the finite from. Descartes thought it was from the infinite. We will see if that is going to be one of the solutions offered, but it's not going to be the only one. And so I will problematize the question of the finite, argue that it's absolutely foundational to mathematics and logic, and then try to offer some solutions to that problem. Okay. So, first the argument from beauty then, today. So, religious people find themselves moved by beauty in a religious way, right? So, scriptures tell things about beauty and how beauty is connected with God, how the heavens tell the glory of God, for instance. There seems to be some kind of a psychological movement that happens in a lot of people where they see the world as beautiful and it leads them to believe in God. It's maybe in some ways perhaps a reverse of the move where people see the evil in the world and leads them to not believe in God. It's not so much an argument at this point, it's just a psychological fact. Kant famously tried to offered a kind of pragmatic argument based on this, that we have a duty to give thanks to a creator for the beauty of the world, but how can we give thanks unless we believe there's someone to whom we're giving thanks? And so a necessary prerequisite for fulfilling our moral duty is that we believe in God, and so we have a strong kind of pragmatic reason to believe in God. I'll briefly discuss this argument, but that's not the main one I want to talk about. I want to talk about more epistemic than pragmatic considerations. So I'm going to sketch 4 ways in which you might take beauty to offer some kind of support for the claim that there is a God. And there are different reasons. They're kind of different. The first will be the most abstract, based on the concept of beauty. The second are knowledge of beauty. The third will be our sense of beauty. And the fourth, the beauty-friendly arrangement of the world. The fact that the world is both beautiful and that we're capable of recognizing this beauty in it, so the arrangement of the world. The last one is, I think, the one that is that religious people, when they are moved by beauty to belief in God, are most paying attention to. The first 3 are more of interest to academics, I think. And then I will compare these considerations of beauty with well-known considerations based on morality, right? So we have famous arguments, both popular, as in C.S. Lewis, and scholarly, that the existence of morality and our access to moral truth gives us reason to believe. It gives us evidence for the existence of God. I will compare how the beauty arguments fare. I will find, I think, that that in some ways they are weaker than the corresponding arguments for morality, but in one or two ways they are surprisingly stronger. So perhaps they complement the argument for morality. But again, this is just, one of those signs rather than strict arguments. Okay. So close to the beginning of Western philosophical reflection on beauty, we have Plato in the Symposium. And Plato emphasizes a phenomenon that I want to draw your attention to, the great diversity of beauty. Now, in Plato, it's a hierarchical diversity. I'm not going to make much of that in this talk, though I think that might be an interesting avenue to pursue. So Plato says in the description of, through the mouth of Socrates, through the mouth of Diotima, that one progresses from one body to two, and from two to every lovely body, from bodily beauty to beauty of institutions, from institutions to learning, and from learning in general to a special lore that pertains to nothing but the beautiful itself, the form of beauty. There is a very broad variety of beautiful things, and it's very hard to see what they have in common. And it matters to us. The beauty is something that we pursue, and we pursue it across many areas of human life, academic and non-academic, everyday and hallowed. So, so we have beauty of character. We have physical beauty in nature. We have beauty created by human beings in the image, at least to some degree, of beauty found in nature. We have a visual beauty of an abstract sort that doesn't mirror anything in reality, that doesn't have a representation, but that nonetheless exhibits a beautiful structure. There's something here. There's something beautiful here, and not all of it is easily apparent either. So, this is a Jackson Pollock. Apparently, one of the interesting differences between genuine Jackson Pollock paintings and fake Jackson Pollock paintings, or imitations, is that Jackson Pollock paintings, the genuine ones, have a fractal character. If you zoom in on them, they have pretty much the same structure as the whole thing, as long as you don't zoom in so much that you see, individual strokes or molecules or something like that. While the fakes do not, and I suppose it's due to his multi-month process of dripping paint carefully, whereas the people producing fakes do not have this sort of patience or the artistic judgment as to just how to walk across the canvas and how much to drip and when to stop. I said we pursue beauty in everything matters to it, right? We have even, especially in the 21st century, the beauty of industrial design, product design. There is something really lovely. I'm not an Apple guy, but I have to say the iPhone is lovely. There is mathematical beauty. So, we have these pretty pictures of fractals that one finds all over. That's part of the beauty here. But there's also the beauty here that you don't see, but that we know, which is that this is generated by a very simple algorithm. So this is beautiful both for what it presents and for what it represents, namely the output of an elegant and very simple algorithm. involving squaring things in the complex plane. Likewise, we have sort of lovely little symmetric designs, but also the fact that they come from an elegant algorithm is, I think, actually part of the beauty there. Moving on, there's beauty that is not at all visual, or in fact not at all sensory. The smallest exceptional simple Lie group has a certain beauty of its own, which is not the beauty of the letter G, of the subscript 2, though I do like the font, but, but that is insignificant. There's the beauty of poetry, which is twofold. There's the sensory beauty of the sounds that we have in the first 4 lines of this famous Polish poem, and then we have the beauty of the ideas, but not of the sound, in my translation of these 4 lines. We have beauty of proofs and arguments. I feel like this is the classic proof of why there isn't a biggest prime number is just utterly beautiful as a proof. There's the beauty of laws of nature, and maybe as in the physical sciences it's most famous, of course, but also in other sciences. There's the beauty of mathematical facts. I think in addition, there are beautiful proofs, there are beautiful mathematical objects, but there are also beautiful mathematical facts. I think there's something really lovely about the fact that every non-commutative division ring is infinite, or that every natural number is a unique product of primes. Okay, so we can try to divide this up a little bit, but it's very hard to get anything but lists going. So we have concrete things, natural laws, natural functioning, natural objects, natural scapes. So like I think of scapes as arrangements of natural things, but also non-natural things like communities, institutions, customs, and laws. Visiting Oriel, I see the beauty of certain customs, despite their occasional inconvenience. There's the beauty of arts involving each of the senses, and in more than one way. There's the sensory beauty of them, the beauty of the meaning, which I want to include also perhaps the meaninglessness at times in certain abstract cases. The fact that they don't have meaning is a kind of, or don't have any positive meaning, can be a kind of negative meaning there. We have what Plato also notes very much in the Symposium, the beauty of actions, performances, lives, and thoughts. And finally, on the concrete side, if there is a God, presumably he is beautiful because he is said to be perfect, and beauty seems to be one of the perfections. We have beauty in the abstract realm, theorems, proofs, mathematical objects, theories, arguments. Then things, so those are things that seem to be more discovered. Then we have things that seem to be more created, things in literature. And then things like Platonic objects, if there are any. And of course, then we have all sorts of combinations of these things, either within one of these 2 categories above or between them. We have sometimes just juxtapositions, contrasts, echoes, expressions, representations, conjoinings, all sorts of things. And all these things, I think, are beautiful in various ways. I very much want to be a pluralist about this. I think I don't want to identify one of these as beautiful or a small subset of these and say the others are not. And so the puzzle is, what do these things have in common? It's a broad variety of things in which, when they are beautiful, what do they have in common? So we can try to give answers to this question of what they have in common, like this ancient, Socratic kind of question. We have many things, seemingly very different things, and we wonder what they have in common, like Socrates wonders in the Euthyphro about all the different pious actions with their broad variety, what they have in common. We can try to give answers in terms of the character of the instance of beauty. What are the instances of beauty like? What makes, say, that photograph beautiful? Perhaps it's some characteristic of it. Or we could try to give an answer in terms of the relation of the instance to something else. And so if we look at the character of the instance, I think we have such stories as that they just have a brute feature of beauty, not a very popular story. Used to be popular to say there's a kind of proportion in them, kind of mathematical thing. Or maybe the goodness of the thing. If we look at the relation, the most popular story, and probably the most popular in popular culture view of beauty, and also I think pretty popular among philosophers, is it's some kind of a relation to the perceivers, is what makes them, these beautiful things, beautiful. In theory, one could also try to say what makes where the common feature lies is in their relation to their creator, or, and this is the one I will spend some time on and suggest that there is something to this approach, that it's the relation of the instance to particular being, namely God, that they have in common. And I'm going to claim that the best versions of the more plausible accounts lead to theism, or at least to the existence of God. I shouldn't have said theism. I want to be broader than that, at least in this talk. So let's first look briefly at stories that involve the character of the instance. Brute feature stories. It's just a fundamental fact that this thing is beautiful, while this water bottle, crumpled up as it is not. That's just how it is. Just like some things are electrically charged and some things are not. It's just a property they have. That's just how it is. Maybe we can ask the metaphysicians what it is to have a property. It's a great question, but there's nothing special about beauty. It's just yet another property that some things just happen to have. This does not seem very plausible, this kind of brute property that they have. It just seems like it's got something to do with the content or the observers. That seems much more plausible. Proportion theories were at some point popular. People gave stories as to what makes a sculpture beautiful in terms of the right kinds of proportions in them. Those stories worked best for classical art, but even there they failed to correctly predict which instances of art were beautiful and which ones were not. You could have the requisite proportions and not have beauty, or you could lack the requisite proportions and still have beauty. So even within classical art, and certainly they fail for non-classical art. Here's the one that doesn't get much discussed. Maybe, we've got this idea, there are these mysterious transcendental things, the true, the good, and the beautiful. If one has reductionistic inclinations like I do, Occam's razor kinds of inclinations, one wants to reduce one to the other. Maybe, we could just reduce the beautiful to one of these other things. To the true, maybe, it works well for certain aspects of representational art, maybe, but probably isn't that promising to Coeur. But the good, I think, has some promise. Goodness, you could make similarly long lists. So at least that's similar. You can make very long lists of goods, and they are extremely diverse. and extremely puzzling. So maybe these two puzzling things are one thing. Wouldn't it be great if you could take two puzzling things and have only one? I think the goodness theory is underappreciated. I think the main reason for its underappreciation is actually not maybe the best reason to reject it, which is worries that there are beautiful things that are bad. To me, what comes to mind is Leni Riefenstahl's film Triumph of the Will on the Nazi Party Congress. As a whole, I wouldn't say it's beautiful. It, I think, goes on for a little too long. Maybe that's just my 21st century short attention span. But there are aspects of it which are beautiful visually, as well as there's a kind of beauty in content there when you bracket the ideology that it is in the service of. So, for instance, there's a scene that at some level is lovely, where you have a number of young, healthy young men with shovels standing there and preparing to do some good public works, you know, digging ditches, improving roads, that sort of thing. That is unquestionably a good thing, though they kind of have a martial look to them. I mean, you could imagine these being rifles and it wouldn't be very different in appearance. But they are actually shovels, which is much better. And it's better, I think, artistically as well. And then the camera pans over them, and there's a question that's asked first, where are you from? And each one answers with their region of Germany, but the camera moves to the next one while the previous one is speaking, inducing this beautiful unity between all of them, this unity of all these regions, all these people united in this work. And as far as that goes, if that was all there was, that would be very beautiful. But of course we know, look, there's an exclusionary principle behind the selection of these young men. None of them have a stereotypically Jewish features. I assume none of them would be counted as Jewish, though who knows how successful they were in their calling, in their selection of people for the film at that point. So there is, I think, there's evil. There's an evil ideology that is being served by this, by this scene, and is served the more effectively and the more insidiously by the way that it is visually beautiful and also beautiful in the idea that it conveys. But there's also a good there to some degree, and I think it is the beauty of it can be tied to the good. So one option you could say is, well, look, these evil works, they're still good in some respect. They show the camaraderie between the workers. They show the unity of the people when you discount the fact that there's a division in the background as well, which I don't think she's emphasizing at that point. It's there in the background to the film, of course, because of the ideology, but it's not something she's emphasizing here. So that's one option. The other option, you could say, well, you could just say, look, the good is the beautiful, and these evil works, they're just not beautiful. They just look beautiful. We are mistaken in thinking that they're our initial impressions are mistaken. It's like illusions. We have visual illusions, and we know that the two lines are parallel, but they don't look parallel. And no matter how well we know that they are not parallel, they still look parallel. And likewise, it could be with art. If the beautiful is the good, it could be that it could be an illusion that it's beautiful, but one that we have a very hard time psychologically ridding ourselves of. It pulls on us, which is why it gets used in effective propaganda. Of course, there's tons of propaganda that is just plain kitschy as well. Leni Riefenstahl is, I think, exceptional in the production of propaganda. Now, when I was thinking about this, I found myself very strongly pulled to the good theory, and then I thought, but there is a difference, and for me, it's a kind of emotional difference. I find that the beautiful pulls on me differently. It's a more visceral kind of pull. It's a more mysterious kind of pull. And it seems to me the beautiful kind of pulls us beyond the beautiful thing in a way in which the good, at least overtly, does not. So I think there is still a distinction to be made. So I don't want to go for any of these theories based on the character of the instance of beauty. So what about the other approach? The relation between the beautiful thing and the perceiver. So you could have theories on which the beautiful is what we perceive as beautiful or what we are attracted by. The perception theory is probably the most popular theory of beauty in our time, and probably in all times. It seems to come fairly naturally to people to think this way. I don't think an attraction theory is plausible as a I mean, the beautiful certainly does attract, but other things attract than the beautiful. And clearly so, in a way that I think it would be implausible to say we're just mistaken in thinking those things aren't beautiful. The perception theory needs more detail, of course, because as it stands, it's pretty circular. The beautiful is what we perceive as beautiful. So we need some way of filling out that right-hand side beautiful, maybe specify the particular qualia of beauty or something like that, which is going to be a difficult task. But I'm not saying it's an impossible task. I want to raise the question, though, of the level of generality in this subjectivist kind of theory. So we could have one of three stories at least. The first one is a particular level one. Every time a particular individual perceives a particular instance as beautiful, it is beautiful. There, I think we've got the problem of bad taste and the possibility of error. It seems very plausible to me that there is such a thing as bad taste, and that there is such a thing as error. In fact, I'm quite sure I have bad taste in certain ways. I trust the testimony of wise people that some of my tastes are bad. But I'm still, attracted to these things. The rules story, the level of generality in the rules is interesting. You might have the story that we have rules of beauty embodied in our patterns, in our perceptions, and everything, or maybe instituted by society, instituted maybe to some degree by the art world for non-natural beauty, and everything that the rules rule as, quote, beautiful, unquote, is beautiful. You might try to run the error line again, but can't a society have bad taste as a whole? And sort of, elites often say this kind of thing. But it's hard to say how well it works. I mean, for one, the elites are parts of society. Maybe it's a kind of hierarchical definition where the elites have more say, though I don't know what exactly defines an elite qua elite. But I don't know. I mean, it seems to me very plausible that I individually have poor taste at times, but it seems less, it seems easier to think that society does, in some sense, at least seen maybe with some of the wiser people as having more say as to what counts as society. Maybe that works better. But I'm worried about the extrinsicality. So suppose I'm admiring the proof that there are infinitely many primes, or a Renoir. And behind my back, while I'm admiring it, the rules change. Society starts now judging these things to be ugly. The mathematicians start rejecting papers with proofs like this, saying, this is an ugly proof, find a nicer one. We want lots of calculations, lots of messy numbers, and so on. I think I would not be led to think I am mistaken in my contemplation of the proof or of the painting as beautiful just because these things are happening behind my back. It seems too extrinsic to the work and to the perceiver. Finally, I think this is, to me, this is why I find subjectivisms in epistemology, aesthetics, and ethics not plausible. it makes it very hard to see why beauty matters as much as it does. And I don't just mean psychologically matters, but really matters. Now, one might say it doesn't, but it seems to me a datum that it does. Here's a different relation to an observer's story. You could have a story on which what defines beauty is an appropriate relation to a properly functioning observer. And I think, and we'll talk more about this in the third and fourth lectures, I think properly functioning is defined in terms of kinds. So I think this is going to be a story on which the beautiful is relativized to kinds of things. In this case, in our case, presumably human beings. And so the beautiful relative to a kind is what a properly functioning member of that kind perceives as beautiful, or would perceive as beautiful. Now, I think there's some problems with this. The first problem is that the kind would have to, in this case, embody an enormous complexity of norms, just because it's of norms as to what is rightly perceived as beautiful. Think back again to this, to the fun I had showing you different pictures of various kinds of beauty, right? There would need to be, the kind would have to embody a set of norms. And it seems normatively inappropriate, given how much beauty matters, that these be just some kind of random selection of this. That's an intuition, maybe you don't share it, but it seems to me that you could have a game where the rules are just pretty random. You have to do this move or that move or that move, and they don't fit in any kind of unity. But it seems to me that's not, first of all, we wouldn't find the game fun. And secondly, it's not a kind of game that I think is important to play either. I think a believer in God has a solution to this kind of problem. And it would be a twofold solution, and I will talk more about this pattern of this kind of twofold solution in lecture 4, that natural kinds are images of God, and that means that not every random selection of norms forms a possible natural kind. And secondly, that God wisely chooses which one to instantiate. I think that could help with this problem, the complex mess of norms. Second problem, you might have this intuition, that just as tone-deaf people like me cannot appreciate certain kinds of beauty, seems like it would be odd to think that beauty has to be limited to the sensory modalities that human beings have. Seems like there should be some kind of beauty that could be seen through the sensory apparatus that bats have, that we cannot imagine what it's like. And bats perhaps cannot imagine what it's like for a different reason, for lack of certain cognitive functions. Well, that's the second problem. I think the second one is less problematic, because if we have the kind relative story, we might say, yeah, but there's still such a thing as beauty simplicator. It's what is appropriately perceived as beautiful by a member of some kind or other. Now, you might worry that that lets too much in, that maybe there are so many possible kinds that anything could be seen as beautiful. Again, if natural kinds are images of God, perhaps there isn't such a great diversity of kinds, of possible kinds, and so perhaps this isn't such a problem. And in general, I will argue that deriving proper function from kinds is evidence for theism. So I think in relation to properly functioning observer theory, I'm not super happy with it, because I still want to know about this. The beautiful is what we would perceive as beautiful. I want to know something about what is this perceiving as beautiful. But I think besides that problem, this faces some problems that I think are best solved by theism. Another option might be maybe what makes things beautiful is some kind of relation that the things have to their maker. Now this has immediate problems. Abstracta, at least mathematical abstracta, don't seem to be the sort of thing that is made. Maybe plots of novels are made, but mathematical abstracta don't seem to be made. So that would require us to either generalize the notion of making or creating to selecting from among many, or maybe have some kind of a story on how there is a being like God who creates the abstracta, or is maybe a source in some other way than creation, but enough to count as to fulfill this relational task. As applied to beauty of nature, of course, this is only going to work if we have a creator of the universe. So this theory directly, I think, leads to theism. I think the major problem with an approach like this is it's extremely difficult to say what the relevant relation to a creator is that makes something be beautiful. That seems to be just as puzzling and just as difficult as the question of what the beautiful is. So I'm not sure any progress has been made, but I still want to list it. Some other options, maybe, it seems like some instances of beauty produced by us would still be beautiful even if they were produced by a random process. That may not be true of all things. Certain kinds of conceptual art, if they were the output of a random process, would lack at least certain aspects of their beauty, which is not the visual aspects, but the aspect of saying certain things. Maybe the solution to that is the beauty requires a necessary creator behind everything. Maybe, but that seems to be a bit of a reach. It's a problem, too, that this theory seems to lead to theism, but religious people seem to agree that God is beautiful, and yet God has no source. Maybe one can try to get around that by adopting Descartes' theory that God causes himself, which seems incoherent, or adopting the doctrine of the Trinity, which to me seems incoherent, but to many seems, which to me seems coherent, but to many seems incoherent. But I think the main problem here is that it's not clear that we've made progress because it's not clear what the relation is. So I want to try something else. And I'm not sure I'm convinced by this. I'm sort of going back and forth between this and the perception by a properly functioning member of a kind story. So the thought is this. God is divine. I want to say something about the being divine in this kind of broad sense, not the sense of theologians use, but this broad sense in which you can talk of a divine cheesecake, perhaps. God is divine fundamentally. But things that participate in God are divine derivatively. They're godly in that way. So some things participate in God. When we see something, then the theory goes as follows. When we perceive something as beautiful, we are perceiving it, we are representing it as participating in God or as being God. Namely, we are perceiving it as divine. And the beautiful just is the divine, either the fundamental divine, namely God, or the derivative divine. Now, this, of course, like every theory, it has strengths and weaknesses, and there are some things, of course, a theory does very well with, and so it very nicely explains the mystery and pointing beyond things in beauty. I should also note that this theory is not tied to classical theism. You could have a pantheist version of this, or perhaps even more comfortably a panentheist version of this theory. it fits really well with this cross-cultural link. Across all cultures, people seem to be connecting beauty with religion, either by being motivated by beauty to embrace a religion, or being motivated by a religion to produce or embrace or admire beauty. There is a theory that the Lascaux cave paintings are, which are indeed beautiful, are religious in nature. The theory is based on comparisons between that and ancient Near Eastern art that is known to be religious in nature. I'm not sure if the theory is correct, but it has some plausibility. It would not surprise one that this kind of an image of this powerful animal has a religious significance. Part of the evidence is supposed to be that a number of the animals portrayed are ones that are not hunted by the group, are just these great beings. I don't know. And of course, in contemporary and religions, we have beauty exhibited, produced by the religionists, extremely intricate, sometimes representational, sometimes not representational, sometimes both. And in here we have texts which are representational, and the visual arrangement is probably not representational. It's not right. So the spaces where religious practices occur are often beautiful, as well as various objects. Religious objects are beautiful. So if the beautiful is the divine, this makes all perfect sense. But of course, we can always find things that a theory can explain. So what about the problems for the theory? The most obvious one is that atheists have as developed a perception of beauty, as far as we can tell, as theists. And yet, surely they are not seeing, when they see a beautiful mountain, they're not seeing it as a participation in, or as something that's participating in God. Or are they? You might think this is a controversial claim in the philosophy of perception, highly controversial, but one that I'm attracted to for independent reasons, that when you see red, you're roughly doing something like perceiving something that represents a thing as emitting or reflecting light of roughly 680 nanometer wavelength. There's a lot of detail to be filled in. It's not, the approximation, the around is kind of a cheat, and exactly how this works is hard. But the story is going to be, that is what the representation, that is what the perceptual representation means, but we don't actually conceptualize it in this way until we do the science and realize, well, that's what is being represented. It's a mysterious quality, but it is that one that is being visually represented by the quality of red, I think. Now, that is highly controversial, but if it could be made to work for colors, it could be made to work for beauty. We perceive it, it's something that represents God, but nonetheless, it's not conceptualized as such. Second problem is that it seems like this makes beauty extrinsic in the same way that the rules story did. It seems like the Rocky Mountains, even in a world without God, would still be beautiful. Maybe. I think you have to see this. The extrinsic is very hard to get a good handle on in a theistic framework, because all things that exist, that I think in classical theism at least, and I think on panentheism, and probably even more so on pantheism, all things that are created, or all things that aren't God, their participation in God is an extremely intimate relation. It's, what we consider intrinsic properties, like maybe shape on some views, is a kind of participation in God. So I think it's hard to say it's extrinsic. It seems like there's a story to be told on which, if the Rocky Mountains would be utterly different if there were no God. They're properties of rockiness. Rockiness is a kind of participation in God. So the very being would be different. So I'm not sure the extrinsicality problem is that serious here. Here's another one. This, I think, is a particularly serious one, too. This generates a ton of beauty, because in classical theism, everything other than God is created by God. So that doesn't mean it's all beautiful, like the squashed dead cat in the middle of the road. Is that beautiful? I think I have two stories. The first is we can relativize the theory by saying there's beauty relative to a kind K, and it's the instances of beauty that are the things that are instance of beauty simplicator, which is just things that are divine, that are perceivable by normal instances of kind K. So the beauty maybe of the squashed cat is not humanly perceivable. So it's not beautiful to humans, but it is perhaps beautiful simplicator. Still biting the bullet there. The second way, to some degree, the second way to bite the bullet would be to say, yeah, everything is beautiful, but you have to see it the right way. I remember in some mystical book, perhaps by Thomas Merton, that I read decades ago, there is mention that of a Buddhist who says, if you've found enlightenment, you will see beauty in everything, even the dead cat in the middle of the road. That's where I got the example. I think there's something to that, but I'm not sure. I'm not enlightened in this way. And then the fourth problem is evil beauty. If there was a problem for the goodness theory, but it's also a problem for the divinity theory, just as much. And again, I think we have two solutions available. One is that some things can be divine in one respect, but not divine in another, or maybe that it's an illusion to think that these things are actually beautiful, even though they seem so. Okay, so that's the first story about concepts. I'll pass over this. The epistemological argument. I spent 15 minutes drawing one of these pictures. You can guess which one. So, absent theism, evolutionary debunking arguments against ethical knowledge, I think, have a fair amount of force. That we are selected for survival, not for the truth of ethical beliefs. You can apply similar arguments against other kinds of knowledge, like against knowledge of other kinds of objective norms, like epistemological ones, and also aesthetic norms. I think it's clearly less of a problem to be a subjectivist about aesthetic norms than about epistemological or moral ones, but it's still problematic. Theism provides a nice explanation of how various normative judgments, including ones of beauty, could be truth-tracking and yet have evolved. God can set up evolutionary scenarios on which designed to make us appreciate or believe certain things. I think this is this might give you some evidence for theism, but it's quite a bit weaker than the analogous arguments from ethical and epistemological knowledge. There aren't many from epistemological knowledge. That hasn't been developed much, but And the reason it's weaker is because it's much easier to be a subjectivist about beauty, and the cost is much lower. Nonetheless, I don't think one should be a subjectivist about beauty, because this is not as beautiful as this, clearly. Here's one argument that I think is interesting. The sense of beauty. So we have a sense of beauty, may or may not be truth tracking. If it's truth tracking, we need to explain why it's truth tracking. That's the previous argument. But if it doesn't track truth, it's still puzzling why we have it. Now, on the moral and epistemic side, it's really easy to give evolutionary stories as to why we have something like a sense of morality or a sense of epistemic propriety, because it just helps us survive in many, many ways. On the side of beauty, we can speculate about things. We can speculate about, appreciation of mates, about how, the prettier fruit are better to eat. Are they really? Maybe expensive displays for mates are useful, and maybe beauty is somehow bound up in these. On the other hand, so much of what we find beautiful, maybe the vast majority of it, is so useless or even harmful. I'm an indoor rock climber. I would love to be an outdoor rock climber because of the beauty that could be attached to the athleticism involved. But it's just too dangerous. So the beauty of the outdoors pulls me there, but it's just the statistics are poor. There are just too many deaths. Hiking is great. Beauty pulls us to it, but it's dangerous. Tigers are lovely too. And then a lot of the beauty that we appreciate is just was completely irrelevant to us, presumably whenever we were evolving. Mathematical beauty, say, or the beauty of g equals 8 pi t. That was for a long time unknown. We could say that, maybe this is just that the beauty of these other things that we didn't evolve for is just a spandrel, as the evolutionary biologists call it, something that is a side effect of an evolutionary process but not itself selected for. And there's a small core that's evolutionary helpful. I think that degrades the pursuit of beauty. It makes it be like just the pursuit of drugs. It makes it be it just so happens that when we see these things, it gives us certain kinds of pleasure. So what? Why devote your life to that? You could be more effective by attaching electrical stimulation to that part of the brain. I'm going to skip option 2, though. I think you could try to expand the core, give more speculative stories that apply to broader things. I think there still will leave a lot unknown. On the other hand, if there is a God, there's many reasons one could give. Good reasons for God to have us set things up so that we would evolve in such a way that we would have a sense of beauty. Certainly, if beauty is divinity, a sense of beauty would seem to be the sort of thing that's relevant to God. But also, all these other stories are things that God could care about. Mate selection, social cohesion, healthy food, relaxation, all these things. And then the religious pull of art. Also, I want to say, and this is going to be something that I will talk about a number of times in various contexts, there is the phenomenon of residual confirmation. So even if we can give a good evolutionary explanation of the sense of beauty, evolution does not confer an extremely high probability on there existing beings that have a sense of beauty. Probably doesn't even confer a high one, maybe just not a very low one. Because evolution is probably not in the business of conferring high probabilities on specific adaptations. Evolution conjoined with theism, I think, gives you a better explanation. It confers a higher probability, makes it more likely that a sense of beauty would come about. So even given an evolutionary story about the sense of beauty, we can still have evidence for theism because it still explains things to say that why do we have the particular kind of evolutionary process that led to a sense of beauty? Well, because God had all these reasons. I'll skip this. I'll skip the Kantian argument, actually. I want to move to the arrangement story. And so the arrangement question about beauty is the one that actually pulls people. Why is there so much beauty around us, right? And we can give all these lists. We've seen all these pictures. I won't bother. Why is there so much beauty not around us, but in mathematics, wherever mathematics is? And finally, why are there beings capable of appreciating beauty? Appreciating it, creating it, uncovering it, all these things. Why are there such beings? Now, if God exists, He has many reasons to make there be beautiful things and make them accessible to us. Beauty points us beyond the everyday. It can draw us to God. Beauty, I think, it may not be the good, but it is objectively good, and appreciating is good. It's an innocent pleasure. If God exists, He's supposed to be perfect, so He wants all the good stuff, including us to have innocent pleasures. So why not the pleasure of appreciating the beauty around us? Very significantly, I'm an aestheticist about science. I think what happened in the scientific revolution is we realized the particular kind of beauty that the physical world embodies. We learn to appreciate the particular genre of beauty that's found in the world, and it's not the Baroque beauty of great diversity. It is the kind of beauty the mathematician appreciates, and hence, as Galileo says, the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics, and not just any mathematics, but elegant and beautiful mathematics. And so God could have a reason to give us a sense of beauty and surround us by beauty in order to make it possible for us to do good science and to make beauty be a guide to truth in science. So there's one sort of beautiful things and accessing beauty. We can say theistic stories. What about abstract beauty? I think on classical theism, we'll want to ground abstract things in God. They're going to be God's thoughts, aspects of God, something like that. And so we would expect the abstract realm to be beautiful if God is, as on the divinity theory He certainly will be. And so all this, so theism can explain why we have so much beauty and why we perceive it. Let me end with a parallel to the moral argument. So the moral argument, or a family of arguments, says that ethics and maybe value and more generally is an argument for the existence of God. There's a conceptual argument. You know, what does it mean to have a moral obligation, say? Well, maybe it's to be divinely commanded. That's a theistic story. Personally, I think that's a terrible story. I am a theist, but I find the story utterly implausible. I just don't find the thought that what God commands is the right moving at all. Now, I could go into details, but I think the divinity theory of beauty is a better theory of beauty than the divine command metaethics is a theory of ethics. So in this way, a conceptual argument from beauty is better, I think. Also, and maybe this is just a function of philosophical focus, there are many alternatives to theistic moral theories that are really pretty good, like Kantianism or utilitarianism. I have some reservations about the specifics, but there seems to be a lot of promise there, and there's, I think, less promise on the beauty side. Maybe, again, maybe this is not fair. Maybe this is just because it's not a topic that, I mean, it's a topic that has been addressed by a number of philosophers, but not nearly as many as on the moral side. On the other hand, the argument from beauty is weaker than the moral one, because subjectivism is way more plausible for beauty than for morality. And also, because there's something more puzzling about norms that override other norms. Obligations override other norms. We have to do the right thing no matter what, no matter if it puts us in ugly circumstances, unpleasant circumstances, etc. The right thing, the morally right thing to do is the one still to do. And that's a very puzzling feature of morality, and there isn't a parallel puzzling feature, I think, of beauty. So, to some degree, the argument's weaker. The epistemic argument from beauty is weaker than the moral epistemic argument because subjectivism is less attractive for morality than for beauty. But there is, on the other hand, an argument from the sense of beauty because it is easier to find evolutionary explanations for a sense of morality, I think, than for a sense of beauty. So we sort of give and take, stronger in some ways, weaker in others. Here's a different parallel. So there's something, I guess it's not technically the moral argument, it's an argument from goodness. It's something like the design argument, that the world is so good, so there is a creator. That's parallel to the arrangement argument, the world is so beautiful. These design arguments are strongly weakened by, seem to be weakened very much by the problem of evil, that there's so much evil around us. So is there perhaps an analogous problem of ugliness that undercuts the arrangement argument? Well, there is, of course. I mean, we can just make it up. It's obvious that you could write down the premises and it's easy. But I think it's easier to give a solution to the problem of ugliness than the problem of evil. Augustine had this holistic solution to the problem of evil, which was actually based on aesthetic considerations, and it works a lot better on the aesthetic side. So his idea is that ugly things are used by artists as part of a much greater work, and the light of the whole, the isolated part, is not important or even beneficial. So for instance, this is, I think, as far as it goes, a really ugly painting of two hands. But, you know, we have a very limited view here. Let's zoom out. Now, the whole is lovely, but it's not just lovely despite the hands. The hands are central to a painting. If they were better developed, better as hands, they would draw our attention because we visually sort of look towards the middle and maybe slightly above the middle. It would draw our attention and keep it there, whereas the attention isn't supposed to stay there. It's supposed to wander away. It's supposed to wander to the glowing clouds and the fields of grass and the billowing bits of the dress and the little boy. And so there's a good reason why the hands are as they are, given where they are in the whole. In the moral case, this kind of a story of the meaning of the part in terms of the whole has the problem that it seems to treat people who are suffering horrible things as mere means. But it's on the ugliness side, it's not as much of a problem. We're not treating people as means. We are maybe treating bits of nature as means, or bits of things made by us, like the dump. It seems less of a problem. Also, I think there's an interesting asymmetry. I'm almost at the end now. So we observe a very tiny part of the universe, both in terms of what modalities we observe under. We have a small number of senses, and the physical extent of it, and so on. We find some things ugly here. I think it is risky to judge an artist not talented on the basis of a small part. Think back to the hands in Monet's Woman with the Umbrella. And it is more risky to judge an artist untalented on the basis of a small part than to judge an artist talented on the basis of a small part. So for instance here, this is a small part, I'll tell you, this is a small part of a painting, though it could be a standalone painting. I think we're right to judge that it is a talented artist on the basis of this small part. But even so, the part, even when it shows talent, it can generate expectations that are then overcome by the whole. We have this very much in literature with surprising plot twists. So if there's something in the part that we don't like, that might well disappear in the whole. Or it might become transformed in its meaning in the whole. But I think when there's something good in the part, there's a chance that, that it will not actually be good in the whole. I mean, in literature we see these things, the events that seem to be good but turn out to be bad. But the talent of the writer or the painter in the part it can be judged from just the part if it's talented. But the lack of talent, I think, not always. Sometimes there may be a specific reason for why it looks it's written in a stilted way, in a stilted voice, say, because the whole can overcome it. So here, let me zoom out for this one. I had fun once in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., looking at paintings close up and seeing ways that the whole is different from the parts. So the whole is beautiful, as is the part, but the tone is utterly different. And there's good reason for the difference. Again, we have the foreground and the background, and there's a theological significance here as to why the thing in the background is dimmer and so on. So I think positive judgments, I should have said can, be confidently made based on a small part, or with some confidence at least, but negative ones not so much. And so I think there's an asymmetry which makes the argument from ugliness not a very strong one. So, in sum, arguments from beauty provide some evidence for the existence of God. In some ways they are stronger than, and in others weaker than moral arguments or goodness arguments. They are, I think what's particularly attractive is that they are less subject to worries about the problem of evil, at least less directly subject to them. Thank you.